For the first time since 2001, DreamWorks Animation is back on top thanks to a little film called The Wild Robot. The Wild Robot seems to have almost snuck up on us. I mean, I knew it was coming, but I really feel like, given the buzz, the reception, everything, it just kind of, bam, it smacked down, slapped us in the face, and you know what, I'm here for it. Even with a top-tier studio, A-list actors, and a showcase of the film's stunning animation seen in its trailers, it's still a new IP. Something original, which, don't get me wrong, is exactly what we need right now. New ideas, but it shouldn't be understated the amount of work, the amount of extra work a studio has to do to convince an audience, especially one composed of younger viewers and their guardians, to sit in a theater and watch a movie about something they're not necessarily familiar with. Hell, even Shrek wasn't the monumental hit that it is today until viewers started spreading the good word. When DreamWorks first exploded onto the scene with Shrek, yes, I know they had films made before then, but Shrek was like a landmark film for the studio. DreamWorks was attempting to be the antithesis to Disney animation, and I guess Pixar as well, inverting many of the fairy tales and tropes that made The House of Mouse so successful in the first place. But you can't be the antithesis without the success of, the thesis.
Buzz! You're flying!
The studio built their name as a counter-program to Disney Pixar, and in so doing, chained themselves within the confines of the mouse's shadow. The release of Ants only solidified this idea in the mind of the audience, and while the film features an entirely different plot and focal point, is sort of like the Armageddon and Deep Impact kind of these movies were weirdly in development at the same time, but are super different, only it's with bugs and they're both animated. Anyway, releasing so close to A Bug's Life left history to remember it as a knockoff rather than a standalone hit, even if it really has nothing to do with Bug's Life. Over the years, DreamWorks has adapted and evolved, changing its style and brand of storytelling depending on the story that needed to be told. At the same time, Pixar animation has felt, stalled. If you watched my video on Inside Out 2, you know my feelings on Pixar right now and how it feels like they're having a bit of an identity crisis. And thankfully for DreamWorks, it couldn't have come around at a better time, as DreamWorks Animation is really starting to push the envelope as to what an animated film should be, as to what audiences deserve from their theatrical animated fare. For years, it feels as if Pixar has found its groove and stuck to what's worked in the past. And sure, while it should be mentioned that IPs such as the continuous saga of a One Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon have settled into a pretty safe hole with no signs of switching it up in the near future, DreamWorks has been on a hot streak of beautifully designed movies for the past few years, culminating in their most recent release, The Wild Robot, a movie quite literally about overcoming tradition, overriding your existing programming to become something better. In the wake of plateauing Pixar, DreamWorks has been unafraid to push new boundaries, tell new stories, and deliver a movie unlike we'd ever seen before. There's a small irony in that The Wild Robot comes at a time where Pixar is in a spiraling identity crisis and Disney is churning out sequels to existing properties instead of innovating and being creative. But I think that uncertainty in the animation landscape allowed DreamWorks to dig into what made a studio like Pixar so successful in the first place, telling a story that both adults and kids can relate to that doesn't, and I mean doesn't, condescend, which is kind of a rarity with the rise of Illumination and films like it over the past, decade or so. There isn't a parent in the theater that can't relate to a story about the struggles of motherhood and the theme of forging a bond with something or someone that you never planned to have as a part of your life. The Wild Robot has the signature DreamWorks edge, sure, but it's also remarkably wholesome. It's a staggeringly beautiful film on all fronts, and we're gonna get into all of that, from breathtaking visuals to the absolutely Oscar-worthy score, but ultimately, it comes down to this. The Wild Robot, without a doubt, is DreamWorks' ticket to finally smashing its way out of its shadowy Pixar prison. But speaking of shadows, are you living under the shadow of all the bland vitamins, supplements, and green powders that you're knocking back all at once just to meet your daily nutritional needs? Well, try Groons. Groons are a convenient, comprehensive formula packed into 8 gummies a day. And I mean, come on, who doesn't love gummies? It's way better than those gross and hard to take pills that we all have to take on a daily basis. Generic multivitamins only contain around 7 to 9 vitamins, but Groons have 20 plus vitamins and minerals and 60 plus whole food ingredients. And with no artificials or flavors, Groons still taste like a fruit snack. Groons are also fully vegan with a pectin base instead of gelatin and are more affordable than most vegan options. Groons is more comprehensive and accurately dosed than your current nutrition solution and contain 100% of your daily needs for safe vitamins and 25% of your daily needs for certain minerals that are potentially toxic at excessive levels. 99% of supplements are lazy and use an off-the-shelf generic blend that may be doing more harm than good, providing too much of a good thing with values over 100% of the recommended daily needs. Groons are perfectly balanced and more absorbable because they are in a gummy form, which is more bioavailable than a tablet. At similar concentrations, your body utilizes Groons nutrients better. With powders and pills, I mean, you're essentially paying for expensive pee because you drink water alongside them, which, let's face it, decreases effectiveness. So you know what? Skip the drink fatigue, green powders, and throat clogging pills. Enough of that. It's gone the way of the dodo, and it's time to enjoy concentrated nutrition by giving Groons a try with up to 45% off at my link in the description below. That's 45% off using my link in the description below, and thank you so much to Groons for sponsoring this video. While the robot obviously on the surface seems to take some inspiration from other, let's say, robot-themed animated movies such as The Iron Giant and WALL-E, it draws from them like a well of ideas, but expands in the best way possible. One of my biggest critiques of Pixar's massive hit, WALL-E, a film everyone loves, but I think is just kind of good, not great. Like, it would have been better if it had just stuck with what they were doing in the first part of the movie. Whatever, that's not the point. The worst part of WALL-E is its inclusion of humans as main characters. The post-apocalyptic world it sets up is so disgustingly beautiful to look at and so incredibly vague that it lets us focus more on the characters in it rather than the beings that created it. The moment that the humans enter the plot in a big way, it feels like our protagonist takes a bit of a back seat. The horrible thing we as humans seem to have done to the world becomes instantly forgivable when we're also able to laugh at the silly characters on the space cruise. Hey, you know, I'm not saying that The Wild Robot does something similar, but did you notice that this movie also takes place in the future that follows some sort of cataclysmic failure of the planet due to climate change? I mean, it's real quick. The movie doesn't exposit about it whatsoever, but we see San Francisco underwater to the point where only the very tops of the uprights on the Golden Gate Bridge rest higher than the sea level. And LA fares exactly the same. There's hundreds of meters difference. The survivors of humanity, or at least the only humans we ever see, appear to be concentrated inside a literal greenhouse. And yet, despite this, all that these last surviving vestiges of humanity care about is the corporation above all. They're only concerned with profiting off of the robots and ensuring all company property arrives at its destination. That's barely even a joke or a fictional world, that's just our world, especially Western Americanized society. And while that's not entirely the point of the film, nor does writer-director Chris Sanders linger on it, making the texture of the world part of the literal text, it's kind of wild that a studio as massive as DreamWorks gave this a pass. They're a giant corporation with a big carbon footprint, and it's not as though they're innocent in regards to pumping out products just because they can. The Wild Robot never loses sight of what it's about, and while it may be set on an Earth ravaged by human error, it never gets bogged down in it, only pausing our main story briefly to show us pieces of what's become of the world's previous owners, and perhaps subtly making the case that if we don't want this to happen, maybe we should defy our programming and work together to save the planet. It's also a decidedly cynical gag to portray the aftermath of catastrophic climate change this way, and that's something I really marvel at with The Wild Robot, how effectively it deals in dark themes. It's something that feels dangerous, but authentic to what kids want and how they act. Kids generally don't have filters, they kind of just react and comment with whatever they're thinking. Stuff they either joke about or want to engage in can push boundaries in a sense. I mean, that whole gag where the possum says she has 7 children, we hear one get eaten off screen and she corrects herself to say 6. That's fucking dark, man. It's very effective and funny in an almost Monty Python-esque way, but it's morbid. And that's part of why it works. The film is so often engaging in a tightrope walk where it could either shy away or overdo it at any moment, but it never falls off. It feels like every moment is played just right. And honestly, that's kind of what I love about DreamWorks. When they get it right, they have a bit of an edge, but also aren't afraid to go lowbrow from time to time, as we've seen in stuff like the Shrek films. On the other hand, you'd also almost expect a kid to leave the theater quoting, 6 now. Like, it's a moment designed to really work and have everyone laughing, and it's memorable because of that. The movie handles these ideas of mortality authentically as a result, because of how matter-of-fact and darkly comedic, but nevertheless real and ruthless the animal kingdom is presented as. It shows the need for kindness in an ecosystem that is hell-bent on tearing itself apart. DreamWorks has always seemed like the older brother to Pixar in terms of filmmaking. Their material always dared to include themes that were a little more taboo, darker, I guess, if you will, tell jokes that are a little dirtier, and trust all the while that the audience would both understand and appreciate them for doing so. DreamWorks gives kids the benefit of the doubt, and they'll be able to grasp deeper and more complicated concepts beyond what they've experienced in their own lives. Like a robot. Let's talk about how this movie is built and all the cogs that make it what it is. One of the most breathtaking pieces of Western animation to date, and quite frankly, one of the best films I think I've ever seen. So let's start with the most obvious cog, the animation. For as much of a visual achievement as Toy Story or Shrek were for their time, when you look to place them side by side with The Wild Robot, the storybook-esque nature landscapes, the kid-oriented but still largely true-to-life animals, and the kinetic, micro-detailed way this is animated, how meticulous and gorgeous this all is, a painting you simply fall into. And we quite literally are in a different century of it all. I mean, it's crazy to look at the progression of this whole thing, and it's right in line with what a departure this is for DreamWorks on even a visual level. The Wild Robot is a new frontier of its own, but it feels like the final evolution in a 3-part animation growth, starting with 2022's The Bad Guys, continuing on with the movie that had no right to be as good as it was, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and culminating in this beautiful piece where every frame feels like a brushstroke from the hand of Bob Ross. They've carved out a path separate from what's come before and what was expected of them. The direction and goal here was to make a film that literally feels like a work of art you'd hang up in a museum, and The Wild Robot pulls it off. I mean, this whole fucking movie should be in a museum. Like, good lord. And in so doing, I think it's also emblematic of the migration Chris Sanders went on in the process of discovering the look of the film. It comes full circle. 2D analog paintings that were predominantly how animation was delivered. Then you have the rise of 3D during the early 2000s and 2010s, and picking up some stuff from that transition, such as the ability to move the camera in 3-dimensional space. And then he dials it all back to create something wholly original and unique that combines all of that, which is genuinely saying something living in a post-Spider-Verse world. The feeling of absolute awe that the art you're observing is emblematic of a new age of cinema. And it's not just the animation that soars to new heights, but like, good Jesus, the music. Oh, the music is exceptional. The Wild Robot is a film that really allows music to function as a leading character, even usurping Roz herself as the lead in some sequences and expressing the emotions that words simply can't convey, could never convey. It elevates everything to just like such a visceral level that hits you right in the emotional core of your being. Like, Chris Bowers, man, fuck. He takes us on a journey from the moment we're thrown into the film to its heartwarming ending, with pieces like The Migration rivaling other DreamWorks greats, even surpassing it in my opinion, like How to Train Your Dragon's Test Drive. Each leaf on this island that's home to the characters, every tree of the movie, is made instantly more vibrant and full of life by Bauer's powerful accompaniment. Like, someone, please get this man an Oscar nomination. My lord, it's incredible stuff here. But ultimately, all of those elements are merely the surface of what makes The Wild Robot so remarkable. Would the movie be able to skate by as a pleasant, enjoyable watch just based on technical merits? Maybe, I don't know, but this is the last film to settle for getting a passing grade or to run through the motions. There's so much depth to be found, even in the smallest of character interactions. So much of the island the animals live on is oriented around the vicious cycle of eat or be eaten, fight or flight. Like I said before, everything's rather matter-of-fact and at times even mean-spirited with a morbid edge. But you know what? That's kind of the way life is. But by presenting such a hardened, treacherous environment so plainly and authentically, it allows for a deeply satisfying story of technology versus nature actually having a positive benefit, of unifying all the chaos and danger and predator versus prey dynamics. The first 10 or so minutes of The Wild Robot really hammer home the brutality of nature and the elements, which we see firsthand through Roz's eyes. In a foreign landscape, a being built to serve the domestic struggles of a modern world finds a purpose to devote herself to. To do so, she learns how to change, to adapt, and to grow into more than just what she was made for. Sometimes to survive, you must become more than what you were programmed to be. It's such a great line from the film that I think defines how Roz and her found purpose, Bright Bill's journey, are beautifully paralleled. The runt of the family finding a way to survive and a robot whose existence is predicated on making human life easier, learning together how to survive in a world that wants to literally tear them apart. How do we endure? How do we make it work? How do these characters make it work? The Wild Robot teaches us that however we choose to survive, not to do it alone. The duo of misfits are joined by their guide to this new world, Fink, the lone fox, who teaches Roz about the status quo on the island in exchange for protection from the unforgiving wilderness. Survival isn't something we need to do alone, even though it is something that instinctually comes from being alone, I guess. We need each other. We need help, and that's where our instincts betray us. They teach us to do it alone, that other people can't be trusted. But not being trusting of everyone, not giving people the benefit of the doubt, only creates further distrust, and it's how we become alienated from one another. That's why we have hearts. It's not survival of the fittest, it's survival together. Through Roz's journey, the movie explores the fact that our parents are just people, filled with the same uncertainty, fears, ambitions as us. They're just at a different stage in their lives. Parents are often forced to act like they know what they're doing so that their kids can feel safe and comforted, and it's not until we're older that we realize the sacrifices they made to do so. There is absolutely nothing that prepares you for being a parent. You have a literal life in your hands and are suddenly expected to redirect your purpose and figure out how best to care for it. We don't stop learning and adapting once we become a parent. In fact, one could argue that's only further amplified. The difference is we learn more about ourselves in the process, what we're capable of. We're forced to become more, to become the perfect person our children see us as when they're kids. And even when that fades away as they enter adolescence, we still push through because we're still there as who they most look up to. Our kids might not be as enamored with the idea of us as they were before, but it always loops back around when they're given perspective. The sheer act of raising a child, giving them a fighting chance to exist, live, and make something of themselves in this world when everything and everyone doesn't care about their existence is a gift. It's something only love can provide. It's in that moment that kids see their parents as people who've accomplished remarkable things without a roadmap, without a set of instructions. They improvised, doing what they felt was best, sacrificing much of their own independent dreams and ambitions in the process. But how do our parents continue once they've helped us leave the nest? They take what they've learned as a parent and funnel it back into their community, helping to make it a better, more loving place, to give the experience that they had raising a family to others. This is how Roz truly finds her purpose. Her programming said that she was here to help people. What changes for her is, instead of mindless assistant tasks, it becomes something deeper. In being defective and thinking differently, she's able to mend the real defect, normality, or the status quo, in changing the fundamental ethos of her community. The animals become the people she was programmed to assist and protect. It's the very human act of using intuition to foster something that's always been inside of a person, but perhaps they didn't know how to surface it. That's like a counter to AI, where we're teaching computers to intercede and solve problems and generate manifestations of ideas on their own without our direct input and effort and humanity involved in creating. Here, a computer learns to provide emotional and physiological care, to emanate and encourage empathy despite being programmed to bypass such feelings. Roz finds her own humanity, even when humans programmed her to be void of it. In the words of the great Ian Malcolm,
life, finds a way.
Roz was abandoned on the island, left without a beacon to help her find her own way. Brought together by fate, Roz and Bright Bill forge a relationship, without which either one was likely to survive. Family isn't built by blood. It can be, but it isn't necessarily. It's built by bonds. It's made by the people you surround yourself with and the lives you impact, who impact you in turn. Family is a choice. Kindness, likewise, is a survival skill, and by leading by example, Roz changes the entire mentality of the island and leaves a lasting impact on each of its inhabitants. She becomes memorialized in the end. A robot with one primary task: to help people, enters the world only to realize that the way she can help people is not necessarily what she was created for. Her adaptability, fueled by compassion and empathy, is what allows her to grow. She is not simply instinctual like an animal. She is rewriting her programming to what feels right to become the best version of herself. Like all parents, this is what she tries to teach Bright Bill, but he doesn't realize he's misguidedly desperate to be normal until there's a distance between him and Roz physically, and temporarily between him as a flying adolescent and the kid who ached to be normal. He realizes with his independence that he doesn't require normal, nor should he want to be normal. This is ultimately what parents try to do, and hopefully our paths in life will be an improvement on what's come before as a result, given the knowledge our parents have from the mistakes they've made along the way. The Wild Robot shows that while it takes a village to raise a child, one person can help a village become the best version of themselves. Instead of clawing at each other's throats, isolating and ostracizing, perhaps there's a way we can admire the resilience of a single mother trying to raise her adopted child, giving them a chance to live and aid in the same kindness with which the mother acts. And what the Wild Robot hammers home, in turn, is how we all think we know what our purpose in life is. But in reality, that purpose changes, adapts, and takes on new meaning as we journey throughout life. That adaptability is what separates us from being animals living with the sole aim of survival. Survival can come in many different forms. It doesn't have to be the hardened fight or flight thing. Those instincts can help us protect, but they must be funneled through empathy. Sometimes actions of love defy logic, and yet it's only by pursuing those paths, making those illogical choices, that love and empathy conquer overall. Even when Roz meets her mother, quote-unquote, she's almost glad she didn't grow up to be another robot on the assembly line. She was able to experience life and forge her own path as an individual. One of the most incredible realizations one can come to is the fact that we're all living life for the first time. Mothers, sons, geese, foxes, possums, we're all children trying to make sense of a chaotic, violent existence, improvising as we go along. And that doesn't end when you become a parent. You continue to learn and adapt. The one constant, the answer? Kindness. Setting an example through love that our children and their children will carry with them. We live on in others through the meaning we make and the lives we touch during our limited time here. Our worth isn't measured in the sheer amount of tasks we accomplish, it's in the weight and meaning behind what we do. It's what we do for others and the impression we make on the lives of others, just like the instant impression a mother makes on her gosling. We take that impression and then carry it with us into what we do after them, evolving it, making it better. We do not exist to be replicants of our parents. We exist to become more than our programming, more than simply another version of what's come before. Because if we're all just a moment away from possibly being eaten, maybe we should spend each moment doing something that matters to us. The Wild Robot might be morbid at times, seemingly for the sake of a punchline, but ultimately, that's why it has such a flippant dialogue with death. That's what makes it DreamWorks' most mature film. The Wild Robot fits into the catalog of DreamWorks and their very story as a studio, as a fable about the dichotomy between instinct and improvisation and how the two become intertwined. How do you make your improvisation instinctual, and when does instinct become antithetical to empathy? In the same way that Roz found her empathy through instinct, DreamWorks was able to find a way to let their instincts fuel a more improvised feature here that successfully broke the mold. The Wild Robot is a symphony of soul, crescendoing into the most poignant portrait of parenthood. Its breathtaking animation and score is equaled only by how heart-wrenching and touching it is. It's an epic tale of love and acceptance, about life and loss, and about how our hearts, above all else, defines our connection to all living things. When it comes down to the nuts and bolts of it all, robot joke. I'm gonna shut up now and be serious. The Wild Robot is a beacon of gorgeous animation made by DreamWorks to show the world that they're not afraid to change their own programming, go against their own natural instincts, and evolve as a studio. The film is now the gold standard, or at least it should be, to which other major animation studios look to when designing future projects. When Sony Pictures released Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, it set a new bar for animation everywhere. It showed its audience, hey, when you have the budget of a major studio, here's the extent of the magic you should expect to see on screen, and in doing so, it challenged other studios to follow suit. DreamWorks answered the call with movies like The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, but surpassed that call to action with its latest project. The studio grew into a new age of animation, a standard audiences will not soon forget as they move forward with future projects. The Wild Robot showed the world that DreamWorks was able to still dream,